Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure you're part of our journey. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and get ready for a story that will leave you thinking. And if you love inspiring tales, a like goes a long way. We don't allow kitchen staff at the tasting table. The words cut through the elegant murmur of the exclusive culinary competition like a dull knife. Every head turned toward the elderly man in the simple button-up shirt, his weathered hands frozen mid-reach toward the signature dish, the very one he had created 40 years ago. The silence that followed felt heavier than the ornate chandeliers hanging overhead. The elderly man, Victor Morales, stood motionless as the competition manager's perfectly manicured hand blocked his path to the sample table. Around them, Michelin-starred chefs and food critics in designer attire exchanged glances, some amused, others uncomfortable. Crystal glasses clinked softly as waiters circulated, pretending not to notice the confrontation. The dish in question, a reimagined version of Victor's legendary seafood creation, gleamed under spotlight, now bearing another chef's name. Victor's shoulders slumped slightly, decades of kitchen dignity fighting against this public humiliation. He hadn't come to cause trouble, only to see how his recipe had evolved. But in this world of culinary elitism, his calloused hands and unbranded clothes marked him as an outsider. What no one in the room noticed was how the muscular figure in the corner, initially engaged in conversation with competition sponsors, had gone completely still. Dark eyes fixed on the unfolding scene with growing intensity. If this moment made you feel something, imagine what's coming next. Hit that like button and stay with us. Subscribe now. The competition manager, Elliot Warren, smiled thinly as he adjusted his designer glasses. This area is reserved for accredited critics and special guests only, he continued, voice dripping with practiced courtesy that did nothing to mask the condescension beneath. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable in the public viewing section. He gestured toward the back of the hall where service staff and casual observers stood behind velvet ropes, 30 feet from the exquisite culinary creations. Victor's weathered face betrayed little emotion, a skill earned through decades in professional kitchens where showing weakness meant losing respect. For 40 years, he had commanded kitchens from Miami to San Francisco before arthritis forced him to step away. His Ocean Symphony had become a culinary landmark, taught in cooking schools worldwide, though few ever attributed it to him. The tasting events program prominently featured the dish as a modern reimagining of a classic, without mentioning its creator. "I only wanted one taste," Victor said quietly, his accent thick with his native Puerto Rican roots. "I created this dish in 1982. A few nearby attendees exchanged glances, some skeptical, some curious. One young chef whispered something to his colleague, both snickering behind their hands. The elegant space suddenly felt suffocating to Victor, the spotlights too bright, the judgmental stares too sharp. Elliot's perfectly whitened teeth flashed in what could barely pass for a smile. "Sir, many people have sentimental attachments to classic recipes, but tonight is about celebrating the evolution of cuisine by recognized masters." The emphasis on recognized cut deep. Chef Laurent has elevated this dish to true culinary artistry. He nodded toward a slender man in an immaculate white jacket, speaking to adoring fans across the room. Jean-Paul Laurent, whose restaurants had accumulated 5 Michelin stars across 3 continents. A small crowd had gathered now, sensing drama amid the evening's carefully orchestrated elegance. Camera phones discreetly rose, not yet recording but ready. The culinary world thrived on exclusivity, on clear lines between those who belonged and those who didn't. Victor, with his off-the-rack clothes and working-class demeanor, clearly didn't belong in their eyes, regardless of what he might have created decades ago. "My signature was the lemongrass infused with saffron in the broth," Victor said, eyes fixed on the dish that had once defined his career. And the 3 citrus reduction that... "Perhaps you could share your cooking stories with the staff later," Elliot interrupted, placing a firm hand on Victor's shoulder, attempting to guide him away. "We have important guests waiting to sample Chef Laurent's creation." The dismissal was final, delivered with the practiced efficiency of someone accustomed to removing unwanted elements from elite spaces. Victor stood his ground, dignity overcoming embarrassment. "I'm not claiming credit. I just wanted to taste how it's changed." Something in his voice, perhaps the raw honesty, perhaps the quiet passion, caused a few onlookers to exchange uncomfortable glances. One food blogger, who had been surreptitiously filming, lowered her phone slightly, her expression shifting from entertainment to discomfort. "Security can escort you to the public section if necessary," Elliot said, his voice hardening as he gestured subtly toward a suited man by the entrance. The threat hung in the air, transforming what had been merely uncomfortable into something more sinister. Victor was being treated not just as an outsider, but as a potential troublemaker, all for wanting to taste a dish that wouldn't exist without him. It was then that the crowd parted like a wave hitting shore. Dwayne Johnson, the event's surprise celebrity guest, moved through the space with the effortless charisma that had made him a global icon. Standing at 6'5", his powerful frame wrapped in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, he commanded attention without effort. His expression was neutral but focused, eyes taking in the scene with deliberate intensity. The whispers rippled instantly. The Rock was approaching the confrontation. Elliot's smug expression faltered as he sensed a shift in the room's energy. Suddenly, the manager wasn't the most powerful presence in this encounter, and the realization dawned across his face as Dwayne came to a stop directly beside Victor. "Things are about to take a turn. Don't miss what happens next. Subscribe, like our video, and keep watching. Is there a problem here?" Dwayne's voice carried the same warm authority that had made him beloved both on screen and off. Phones were now openly recording, capturing the unexpected collision of Hollywood and haute cuisine. Elliot blinked rapidly, celebrity-induced panic momentarily overriding his practiced condescension. "Mr. Johnson, an honor to have you with us." Elliot recovered quickly, extending his hand. "Just a small misunderstanding. This gentleman was attempting to access the VIP tasting area, but I was explaining our protocols." The smile returned to his face, confident that The Rock, himself a VIP guest, would understand the importance of maintaining exclusivity. Dwayne accepted the handshake briefly but kept his attention on Victor. "Sir, I couldn't help overhearing. You created the Ocean Symphony dish?" His genuine interest contrasted sharply with the dismissive attitude surrounding them. Several critics and chefs shifted uncomfortably, suddenly conscious of how the scene might appear on social media. "Yes, many years ago at La Perla in Miami," Victor replied, straightening slightly. "I was executive chef there for 12 years. La Perla. Dwayne's face lit with recognition. "My grandfather took me there when I was 14. Said it was important I understand what real food was supposed to taste like." He turned toward the dish on display, then back to Victor. "That seafood dish was the first time I understood food could be art." The energy in the room shifted palpably. Victor was no longer just an old man in outdated clothes. He was suddenly connected to one of the most recognizable stars on the planet through a shared experience. Elliot's eyes darted between them, calculating how to regain control of the situation without offending a A-list celebrity. "That's quite a coincidence," Elliot managed, his voice strained. "However, tonight's event is specifically showcasing Chef Laurent's interpretation of classic dishes. Perhaps at another time, I'm interested in hearing from the creator." Dwayne interrupted smoothly, his tone pleasant but leaving no room for argument. He turned to address Victor directly. "My grandfather always said there was something magical about that broth. He tried to get recipes from other restaurants, but nothing ever matched it." Victor's eyes brightened for the first time since the confrontation began. The secret was in the timing. Lemongrass needs gentle heat, never rushing. His hands moved unconsciously, pantomiming the delicate process. Most chefs force it, extract too much bitterness. Across the room, Jean-Paul Laurent had noticed the commotion. The celebrated chef approached cautiously, his expression a careful mask of professional curiosity. The crowd parted for him almost as readily as they had for Dwayne. Camera phones captured every moment as the current master and original creator stood face to face, separated by decades of culinary evolution and social status. "You are the original creator?" Laurent asked, his French accent pronounced but his English impeccable. "Yes, Victor Morales." There was no challenge in Victor's voice, only quiet certainty. Laurent studied him for a moment before recognition dawned. "The Morales technique for shellfish stock. Of course, it is still taught." This acknowledgement from a culinary star sent another ripple through the crowd. Some of the younger chefs began whispering, searching for Victor's name on their phones. Laurent turned to one of his assistants. "Bring a fresh plate." The young chef hurried to obey, returning moments later with a pristine serving of the reimagined Ocean Symphony. Laurent himself took the plate, presenting it to Victor with a respectful nod. "I would value your opinion." Elliot stepped forward, composure cracking. "Chef Laurent, this is highly irregular. The judging protocol is a guideline, not a prison," Dwayne interjected, his smile unwavering but his eyes firm. "I think everyone here would appreciate hearing from the man who started it all." His statement was met with murmurs of agreement from the gathering crowd. Even those who had been skeptical were now caught up in the unfolding drama, the humble origin meeting the glamorous present, with Dwayne Johnson himself mediating the encounter. Victor accepted the plate with careful hands. The dish before him was a deconstructed version of his creation, elements separated artfully, garnished with molecular gastronomy techniques that hadn't existed during his career. He lifted a small spoon, taking a careful taste of the broth first, as he always had when testing his own creations. The room fell silent, critics and chefs alike watching with unexpected intensity. Even Laurent, decorated and celebrated worldwide, seemed to hold his breath. A complex series of emotions crossed Victor's weathered face: recognition, surprise, appreciation, and a touch of something like loss. 40 years of culinary evolution lay between his original creation and this artistic interpretation. He took a second taste, then met Laurent's expectant gaze. "You found the balance," Victor said finally. "Different technique, but you understood the harmony. That's what mattered most." There was no bitterness in his assessment, only the honest evaluation of one craftsman to another. Laurent's shoulders relaxed visibly at the approval, genuine pleasure replacing professional tension. This story is only getting deeper. What would you do in this situation? Comment below, and let's talk. Dwayne placed a hand on Victor's shoulder, addressing the crowd that had now grown to include nearly everyone at the event. This is what food is really about. Not just the stars or the ratings, but the passion that gets passed down and transformed. His charisma amplified the moment, elevating it from a simple tasting to something more profound. "My career started in nothing fancy, just hard work and respect for those who came before me." Chef Laurent nodded in agreement. "This is the true lineage of cuisine. We stand on the shoulders of those who created the foundations." His acknowledgement carried significant weight, coming from someone at the pinnacle of culinary fame. Elliot, sensing the tide turning against him, attempted to reclaim control. "Well, This has certainly been an interesting diversion. Perhaps we should return to the scheduled program. The judges are waiting to complete their evaluations." Dwayne turned his attention fully to Elliot, his expression friendly but his eyes penetrating. "You know, I've been in rooms with some of the most powerful people in the world. Presidents, prime ministers, billionaires. But I've noticed something interesting." His voice carried easily through the hushed space. "The ones most concerned with keeping others out are usually the least secure about belonging themselves." The observation landed like a thunderclap. Several people couldn't suppress their reactions. A few gasps, some uncomfortable shifting, and more than one knowing nod. Elliot's face flushed deep red, his carefully constructed persona cracking under the weight of being so accurately read by someone whose opinion actually mattered in the room. "I don't think that's a fair characterization," Elliot protested, but his voice had lost its authoritative edge. "We have standards to maintain. Protocols exist for a reason. Protocols should serve people, not the other way around," Dwayne countered, his tone remaining conversational rather than confrontational. "The strongest cultures I've been part of, whether in film, sports, or business, always found ways to honor their foundations while evolving." He gestured toward Victor. "What does it say about our values when we celebrate a dish but dismiss its creator?" Laurent stepped forward, professional dignity intact but humility evident in his posture. "Mr. Morales, perhaps you would share with us some of the original inspiration? I confess I adapted techniques from your approach, but the origin story was lost in culinary school textbooks." Victor hesitated, unused to having the floor in such elite company, but Dwayne gave him an encouraging nod. "It came from necessity, not luxury," Victor began, his voice growing stronger as he spoke. "During a supply shortage in '82, we couldn't get the imported ingredients the menu called for. I remembered how my grandmother made seafood in Puerto Rico, using what was available but treating each element with respect." The crowd had grown completely silent, captivated by this unexpected glimpse into culinary history. Several of the younger chefs were openly recording now, their initial skepticism replaced by genuine interest. Even the competition judges had abandoned their stations to listen. The dish became popular not because it was expensive but because it was honest, Victor continued. Every ingredient had purpose. Nothing wasted, nothing for show. The simplicity of his philosophy stood in stark contrast to the elaborate production of the current culinary scene, provoking visible reflection among many of the professionals present. Dwayne addressed the room again, his natural ability to command attention making him the perfect vessel for the moment's message. "In my world, we talk about paying it forward and remembering where you came from. Seems like that applies in the kitchen too." He looked directly at several of the most prestigious chefs. "Imagine what could happen if your next competition or showcase included not just the stars of today, but the innovators who made it all possible." A prominent food critic stepped forward, her expression thoughtful. "Mr. Morales, would you be willing to be interviewed about the origins of the dish? There's clearly a story here that deserves documentation." Before Victor could answer, Laurent made a declaration that sent another shock wave through the gathering. "For my next event in Paris, I would be honored if Mr. Morales would collaborate as a special guest chef. A fusion of generations." The offer, from a chef whose restaurants had waiting lists months long, represented not just an acknowledgement but an elevation. Victor, overwhelmed by the sudden reversal of his fortunes, looked to Dwayne with an expression of gratitude that needed no words. The Rock responded with a respectful nod, one craftsman to another, before addressing Elliot, who stood deflated at the periphery. "Leadership means recognizing when to stand by protocol and when to stand by people," Dwayne said, not unkindly. The strongest leaders I've known could do both." The event photographer stepped forward, requesting a photo of Laurent, Victor, and Dwayne together. As they posed, the elderly creator, the current master, and the global superstar, phones throughout the room captured the moment. Within seconds, images were spreading across social media, accompanied by fragments of the story. Original creator of famous dish reunited with his creation by The Rock. And Dwayne Johnson bridges culinary generations at elite competition. It's not over yet. The best part is coming. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss it. As the formal competition resumed, the atmosphere had transformed. Victor was no longer relegated to the sidelines, but invited to sit at the judges' table as an honored guest. Conversations throughout the venue had shifted from technical critiques of plating techniques to discussions about culinary heritage and the unsung heroes of gastronomy. Several younger chefs approached Victor during breaks, asking questions about traditional techniques that had been overlooked in their modern training. Elliot maintained a professional demeanor, but his earlier arrogance had been replaced by a subdued efficiency. Occasionally, his gaze would drift to where Dwayne sat, conversing easily with Victor and Laurent. The three men engaged in what appeared to be a genuinely enjoyable exchange, despite their vastly different backgrounds. The contrast between Elliot's earlier treatment and the respect now being shown to Victor wasn't lost on anyone in attendance. "It's amazing how quickly things can change when the right person speaks up," remarked one food blogger to her colleague as they captured footage of the three men laughing together. Her video of the confrontation had already accumulated thousands of shares, with comments praising Dwayne's intervention and expressing outrage at Victor's initial treatment. The hashtag number Respect the Creator was trending in culinary circles, attached to broader discussions about recognition and credit in the food world. As the evening drew to a close, Dwayne made time to speak with Victor privately. Away from the cameras and curious onlookers, the two men shared a quieter moment near the venue's terrace, overlooking the city lights. "Thank you," Victor said simply. "Not just for what you did, but for remembering the dish after all these years." Dwayne smiled, his superstar status momentarily set aside. "My grandfather believed food was about more than taste. It was about moments that stay with you." He was right. He paused, looking out at the skyline. "You know, in my career, I've learned that true impact isn't always about who's the loudest or most visible. Sometimes it's about the quiet foundations that everything else is built on." Victor nodded, understanding the parallel to his own unheralded influence on modern cuisine. "I never needed my name in lights, just wanted to see how the recipe lived on." "Well, after tonight, I think a lot more people will know that name," Dwayne replied. He took out his phone, showing Victor how the story was already spreading across social media platforms. Videos of their encounter had been viewed hundreds of thousands of times in just a few hours, with comments pouring in from around the world. Laurent approached, holding 3 glasses of champagne. To honor the past and improve the future, he offered as a toast. The 3 men raised their glasses, the moment captured by a passing photographer, an image that would appear in culinary publications worldwide in the coming days. 6 months later, Dwayne shared a post to his 230 million social media followers, a photo of himself with Victor and Laurent at the special collaboration event in Paris. The image showed the 3 men in chef's jackets, standing behind an elegantly plated version of Ocean Symphony that combined Victor's original techniques with Laurent's modern presentations. The caption read, "Real legacy isn't about fame. It's about impact that outlasts you." Honored to witness culinary history being made and heritage being honored. Just respect the creators in every field. The post received millions of likes within hours, but its impact went beyond simple metrics. Culinary schools began introducing courses specifically on crediting and honoring the origins of signature dishes. Several prestigious competitions added categories celebrating traditional techniques and their modern adaptations. A documentary series featuring Victor and other unheralded culinary innovators was in development with a major streaming platform. For Victor Morales, now regularly invited to speak at food events worldwide, the validation came not from celebrity or sudden fame, but from seeing young chefs approach cooking with a new respect for its foundations. His story had transcended a single viral moment to become something more meaningful, a reminder that true mastery acknowledges its roots. And in an industry often obsessed with novelty and spectacle, a new question had entered the conversation. Not just what's new, but who created the path we're following? The answer wasn't always found in cookbooks or press releases, but in the quiet dedication of those who had laid the foundations, one dish at a time, their contributions finally receiving the recognition they had always deserved. Wow, what a story! If this moved you, imagine what else we have for you. Hit that like button, drop a comment, and let us know what you think. You'll help us grow if you'll subscribe and get notifications on. And don't stop here. Click one of the videos on your screen and keep the journey going. See you in the next one.